Lauren Giddings was born on April 18, 1984, in Tacoma Park, Maryland. She grew up in a loving family, with caring parents and two younger sisters she was especially close to. From a young age, Lauren had a deep faith and a strong desire to help others. That's why she chose to become a public defender, someone who stands up for people who can't afford a lawyer. To make that dream a reality, she enrolled at Mercer University and moved to Macon, Georgia. Lauren excelled in her studies and even became president of Mercer's chapter of the Federalist Society. She later landed an internship at a law firm in Atlanta, where she met a man named David, and the two soon started dating. After she returned to Macon, they kept their relationship going long distance and planned to get married once Lauren finished law school. In the summer of 2011, when Lauren was 27, she finally graduated. But there was still one big milestone ahead: the bar exam. She spent weeks preparing for it, taking a short break only to attend her younger sister's wedding back home in Maryland. After the celebration, she returned to Georgia and joined her classmates for a small end-of-year party. Not long after that, she told her friends and family she was going to spend the next few days completely focused on studying and asked them not to disturb her. From that moment on, no one heard from Lauren. At first, her friends and family assumed she was just busy preparing for the exam. But a few days later, on June 29th, her sister started to worry. She was on her honeymoon at the time and had been sending her photos from the trip, but Lauren hadn't opened a single message. Her sister knew Lauren was focused on studying, but the fact that she hadn't even read the messages for days felt unsettling. Worried, she reached out to one of Lauren's friends and asked her to check if everything was okay. The friend tried calling first, but the calls went straight to voicemail. So, she and her boyfriend decided to drive over to Lauren's apartment, a small student housing complex right across from the university. The first thing they noticed was that Lauren's car was still parked outside, but when they knocked, no one answered. Her friend had a spare key, so after a moment's hesitation, she decided to let herself in. Inside, the place was a mess. But that wasn't necessarily alarming. Lauren was supposed to move in with her boyfriend David the very next day, so there were bags and suitcases scattered everywhere. But Lauren herself was nowhere to be found. On the other hand, her purse, phone, even laptop was still there. None of it made any sense. Where could she have gone, leaving behind all of her things, and even her car? The friends started calling around, reaching out to people who knew Lauren, and soon, several of them joined the search. They combed the university grounds and nearby streets, but there was no sign of her. They also learned that no one had seen or spoken to Lauren for days. When her family found out what was happening, they drove from Maryland to Georgia to help. Meanwhile, her friends kept searching through the night, but when morning came and there was still no trace of her, they finally decided to call the police. Officers arrived at the apartment complex and searched Lauren's unit, but they didn't find any signs of forced entry or a struggle. Still, her sudden disappearance seemed deeply suspicious, so they called in forensic specialists to process the scene. The team began spraying luminol around the apartment, looking for traces of blood. At first, nothing unusual showed up, but the moment they reached the bathroom, the luminol lit up almost the entire tub. It was clear that a large amount of blood had been cleaned up there. From that point on, detectives feared the worst. It was just too much blood for anyone to still be alive, so investigators quickly shifted their focus to finding Lauren's body. While officers were standing outside, one of them caught a strong, foul odor, one he instantly recognized as the smell of decomposition. Following the scent, he walked toward the apartment complex's dumpsters. The closer he got, the stronger the stench became, and when he finally lifted the lid on one of them, he saw a large black garbage bag, and inside that bag was a woman's torso. Although the victim's identity couldn't be confirmed visually, since her head was missing, detectives were almost certain it was Lauren. Still, they decided to keep the discovery quiet for the moment, not wanting to jeopardize the investigation. It's worth noting that finding the remains was pure luck. The officer had arrived at the complex just minutes before the garbage truck was scheduled to pick up the trash, and they'd parked their cars in a way that blocked the truck from entering. If not for that small coincidence, the body would have been taken to the landfill and most likely never found. As detectives waited for confirmation of the victim's identity and tried to figure out their next steps, they learned something that immediately caught their attention. Lauren's friends and family told them she'd been complaining for weeks about strange things happening in her apartment. She said that sometimes, when she came home, it felt like someone had moved her belongings around. But there were no signs of a break-in, and the door was always locked. This had been going on for quite a while, to the point where Lauren started wondering if she was losing her mind. On top of that, she sometimes felt like someone was watching her, though she never actually saw anyone. Growing increasingly uneasy, she even bought a door security bar to brace the door from the inside. But the strange things didn't stop. Shortly before she disappeared, Lauren had told her boyfriend about it. He tried to calm her down, suggesting it was probably just some pranksters fooling around and that she had nothing to worry about. Police quickly looked into her boyfriend David and found that he'd been out of state during the time of the murder. There was no way he could have done it, so they ruled him out almost immediately. Meanwhile, forensic investigators combed through Lauren's apartment, looking for fingerprints or any other trace evidence. But it looked as if someone had done a meticulous cleaning job. Every surface seemed freshly wiped down with cleaning products. In hopes of finding something, they decided to remove the entire bathtub and send it to the lab for DNA testing. Not long after, medical examiners confirmed that the torso found in the dumpster was indeed Lauren's, officially turning the case into a homicide. They estimated that she'd been killed around June 26th, roughly 3 days before her friends and family started looking for her. However, the exact cause of death couldn't be determined, and there were no signs of sexual assault. Despite detectives' efforts to keep the investigation under wraps, the sudden police activity drew attention from reporters. Soon, journalists were gathering outside the apartment complex, filming news segments and spreading rumors that the police had found a body, even though, officially, no one had confirmed that yet. Detectives decided to question everyone living in the complex and check their apartments, just in case the killer was someone who lived right next door. All of the residents, who were also Mercer law students, immediately agreed to let the police in without a warrant. All except one, 25-year-old Stephen McDaniel. Stephen lived right next door to Lauren, but he flat out refused to let officers into his apartment. He told them that, as a law student, he strongly believed in protecting his privacy and that he had nothing to hide. Naturally, that raised a lot of red flags for investigators. They started looking into him and quickly learned that Stephen had actually been helping with the search for Lauren the previous day and that he'd even given an interview to reporters earlier that morning. He wasn't just some random neighbor. He'd been her classmate, a fellow law student, and even served as vice president of the same student law society where Lauren was president. So yes, he knew her very well, but for some reason, he was refusing to let police see his apartment. And yet, he stayed right in the middle of everything happening around the complex, hovering near officers, chatting with other residents, and talking to journalists. During the interview, Stephen told reporters how he and a few of Lauren's friends had gone into her apartment and searched the neighborhood, trying to find her. But while talking about Lauren, he started referring to her in the past tense, even though at that point, no one yet knew for sure she was dead. Yeah, Lauren was my neighbor. We're just trying to find out where she is at this point. I mean, no one has seen her since Saturday. I mean, the last time anyone heard from her was an email that she sent out, and no one's heard from her since. Did you see her hang out with anyone at the time? Anything like that? I mean, no. No one has seen her since Saturday. I haven't seen anything. I mean, you always hear noise outside, but it's just people walking by pretty much. And she just recently graduated from Mercer? Yeah, she and I, we were both JD students. We graduated back in May. What kind of person was she? I mean, what did you see? I mean, she's as nice as can be. I mean, very personable, very much a people person. Do you know anybody any enemies you might have had? Somebody that might want to hurt her? No, I mean, we all know where she is. I mean, the only thing we can think is that maybe she went out running and someone snatched her. Because, I mean, we went over. One of her friends had a key. We went inside and tried to see if there was anything amiss. But, I mean, she had a door jamb that was sitting right by it. So there was no sign that anyone broke in. I mean, the door was locked when everyone got here. We just don't know where she is. When the reporters mentioned that police might have found a body near the dumpsters, Stephen went completely silent. His face changed instantly. He froze, staring off into space, not saying a word. The journalists kept talking, asking if he was okay, and after a few seconds, Stephen quietly said he needed to sit down. What about in the parking lot area? I know they've been doing a lot of. I think that's where they have recovered the body or whatever they recovered from there. Body. Had you seen anything there? Had you seen anything there? I mean, we don't know if this is the same person. You know what I mean? They took out a body there earlier. We don't know if it's the same person or not. That's why we're trying to ask people if they know who lived there. Are you okay, sir? I think I need to sit down. Eventually, he resumed the interview, trying to answer questions again, though now he was acting very dramatic. I don't know anyone that would want to hurt her. She was as nice a person as there is. What's going on in your mind right now? What are you thinking? Why would anyone do this? She didn't hear anything? No. She didn't see anybody? I just heard something. Maybe I could have helped. Okay. Don't worry. Do you want to sit down for a second? And after the reporters left, Stephen just sat there for a long time, completely still, staring off into the distance. A few hours later, Stephen suddenly changed his mind and told police they could search his apartment after all. The moment detectives stepped inside, they were hit with what looked like organized chaos. Large piles of canned food, energy drinks, random junk, and a lot of weapons. But what really caught their attention came next. Hidden among his things were 2 keys, a master key that could open any door in the complex, and another one, a duplicate that fit Lauren's apartment specifically. When they confronted him, Stephen admitted that he'd broken into several neighboring units when the tenants weren't home, and in one case, he'd stolen a box of condoms. Strangely, he added that he was a virgin, but he never explained why he took them in the first place. Detectives decided to use that confession to their advantage. They arrested him for burglary and took him down to the station for questioning. Meanwhile, officers continued searching his apartment. And that's when they found an empty hacksaw package. Considering the killer had dismembered the victim, this discovery sent an immediate chill through the room. But the deeper they looked, the worse it got. Police found 2 USB drives filled with illegal material involving minors, along with a pair of women's underwear hidden in the closet. When investigators checked his computer, they discovered that Stephen had been visiting Lauren's social media pages obsessively. At the same time, his browser history showed he'd been consuming violent and disturbing adult content, sometimes while looking at Lauren's photos. And even that wasn't the end of it. Detectives found links to online forums where Stephen had been writing graphic stories about murdering and torturing women. And one of the final searches in his browser history was the trash collection schedule for their city. All of this convinced detectives beyond any doubt that Stephen was involved in Lauren's murder. To them, it was clear that he'd been obsessed with her. And since he had a key to her apartment, plus Lauren's repeated complaints about things being moved around while she was gone, the pictures started to come together. Stephen had been sneaking into her home all along. Still, there was one major problem. They didn't yet have any solid evidence directly linking him to the crime. During questioning, detectives tried everything they could to get a confession, but Stephen's behavior was pretty weird. For hours, he sat motionless, answering in a barely audible voice, repeating only 3 phrases: yes, no, and I don't know. And you've lived next to Lauren for a long time? Yes. Have you ever seen her with that dress on? No. You have no idea where she's at? No. Just tell me what happened, brother. I don't know. The detectives grew increasingly frustrated. They pressured him, even tried the classic bluff, claiming they'd found his DNA at the crime scene and that the only thing that could help him now was to confess. But Stephen, who'd studied law himself, didn't fall for it. He stayed completely calm, emotionless, and silent. You know what's crazy? I was talking to people that he works with and everything. They talk about how he always expresses himself. No, but he don't know it. He's very talkative. Stephen, they say you're so talkative. Buddy, that you're always so friendly. You stop in and say hello, and you talk. Why is it that you're acting so short with us tonight? If you have all this character and personality about you, why is it that everything that we get from you is yes, no, or I don't know? Well, you sure were talking to the media tonight, weren't you? They asked what happened. Yeah, that's what we're asking you. What happened? What did you tell them? I told them what I knew. That you didn't know. Do you realize how you're talking right now? Does it not feel weird to you? No. Would you say that this is how you talk all the time? I don't understand. You're just not expressing yourself at all. Everything that's with you is yes. No, I don't remember. I don't understand. You can't help me out with anything. There's nothing you can tell me to help me about this beautiful girl right here. Stephen, that was your friend. Nothing. You gonna let things go down like this? I don't know what you want. I want the truth, Stephen. We just wanted to give you an opportunity to tell it. So you didn't look like a monster at the end. Because you know what? I don't believe that you're a monster, Stephen. I believe that you're a good guy. You've been pinked on. Girls didn't show you the respect that you deserved. You did something stupid. And I believe you feel bad about it. And that's why you're all freaked out right now. But I'm giving you the opportunity to get right. I'm giving you an opportunity to show everybody you're not a monster. That you feel bad about what happened. Your hair is there, man. Your hair is there. We got your hair with the body. How's that, Stephen? I don't know. Yes, you do know. Yes, you do know, Stephen. That's right, buddy. See that? Look at it. See how easy it happens. And it happened to you. Why, Stephen? I don't understand. Oh, you understand? You understand exactly what I'm saying. See this stuff right here? Your hair? Yeah, it fell out of your head when you was moving the body, Stephen. That's right. You remember moving the body? Yeah. Yes, you do, Stephen. Eventually, the detectives left him alone in the interrogation room, and Stephen just sat there for a long time, perfectly still, staring blankly at the wall. Just stay right here. Okay? Okay. I appreciate all your cooperation tonight. Okay? Okay. Officers also asked him to remove his shirt so they could check for any recent injuries. That's when they noticed several scratches across his torso, marks that looked like they'd been made by fingernails. When asked about them, Stephen simply said he had no idea where they came from. Maybe, he suggested, he'd scratched himself in his sleep. Police eventually realized there was no way they'd get a confession out of Stephen, so they shifted their focus to finding hard evidence. They began combing through every inch of the apartment complex, and soon they caught a break. In a maintenance room, officers discovered a hacksaw that perfectly matched the packaging found in Stephen's apartment. It had clearly been scrubbed clean, but forensic experts still managed to find tiny fragments of human tissue on the blade, and DNA tests confirmed they belonged to Lauren. From there, detectives traced the purchase of that same saw back to a local hardware store and pulled the surveillance footage from that day. On the video, clear as day, was Stephen McDaniel buying the saw himself. Investigators also interviewed the maintenance worker who had access to that room, but the man provided a solid alibi for the night of the murder. That left only one person who could have opened the door. Stephen, the man with a master key. Detectives then started digging deeper into his background and talking to people who knew him. Everyone described Stephen as quiet, withdrawn, and just strange, but also very intelligent. Several classmates mentioned that when he met new people, he would ask them two unsettling questions. What would you do in a zombie apocalypse? And how would you commit the perfect murder? Because of his odd behavior, he didn't really have any friends, and most classmates avoided him outside of school. The only person who ever tried to be kind to him was actually Lauren. She found him a bit unusual, but still treated him with respect and kindness. Over the 3 years they lived next door, Stephen had asked her out several times, but Lauren had always politely turned him down. Outside of school, he barely had a life. He spent nearly all of his time at home, with his curtains constantly drawn and no one ever coming or going. In the weeks following Stephen's arrest, police kept searching for more evidence, but every lead came up empty. They also continued combing through nearby areas, hoping to find the rest of Lauren's remains. But that search ended in failure too. The only thing detectives managed to uncover was a lab report confirming that the pair of women's underwear found in Stephen's apartment belonged to Lauren. But soon after, investigators discovered something that sent chills even down the spines of seasoned detectives. On one of the memory cards seized from Stephen's apartment, they found a video, recorded just hours before Lauren's death. Using a long wooden stick, Stephen had taped a small camera to the end of it and lifted it up to Lauren's window, secretly filming the inside of her apartment. That footage erased any lingering doubt about his guilt, and a few weeks later, formal charges were filed, not only for Lauren's murder, but also for 30 counts of possession of illegal material involving minors. As the case moved toward trial, Stephen pleaded not guilty, while prosecutors announced their intention to seek the death penalty. His defense attorney, a former professor who had actually taught both Lauren and Stephen, claimed that police might have framed his client, planting evidence in the apartment to make him look guilty. He also argued against the death penalty, pointing out that Lauren herself had been publicly opposed to it. But in the end, the judge sided with the prosecution. The road to trial dragged on for years. The prosecution knew that with the evidence they had, Stephen still stood a real chance of walking free, because to pursue the death penalty, they needed absolute, irrefutable proof. And the truth was, most of what they had was circumstantial, so a skilled defense attorney could easily plant doubt in the minds of the jury. After some consideration, the prosecution made a calculated decision. They offered Stephen a plea deal. If he confessed in full detail and pled guilty to the murder, the state would drop all the charges related to illegal materials, and more importantly, take the death penalty off the table. In 2014, 3 years after Lauren's death, Stephen finally agreed. According to his confession, around 4:30 in the morning, he dressed entirely in black from head to toe, mask and gloves included. Using the spare key, he quietly unlocked Lauren's door and slipped inside, managing to bypass the door brace she used for extra security. Stephen crept into her bedroom and stood there for a while, just watching as she slept. Then, at some point, the floor creaked beneath him. Lauren woke up, startled, and when she saw a masked figure in her room, she told him to get out. That's when he jumped at her and started choking her while she fought back. At some point, Lauren managed to tear off his mask, and when she did, she saw it was Stephen. Lauren begged him to stop, but he didn't. The struggle went on for nearly 15 minutes before he finally realized she wasn't breathing anymore. Stephen then carried her body into the bathroom and left it there overnight. The next evening, he returned with tools, including a hacksaw, and spent several hours dismembering the body. He placed the remains into trash bags and scattered them across multiple dumpsters near the university. As for the torso, he dumped it in the bin beside their apartment complex, assuming the garbage truck would pick it up soon. Afterward, he cut up his mask, gloves, and shirt into small pieces and flushed them down the toilet. Stephen claimed he didn't really know why he killed Lauren. According to him, he'd suffered some kind of mental blackout and genuinely believed she was still alive afterward, which he said was why he took part in the search for her. But prosecutors didn't buy that story for a second. In their view, Stephen had been obsessed with Lauren for a long time. His social media history, the video he filmed through her window, and his disturbing online activity all pointed to someone consumed by dark fantasies about violence and control. The forums he frequented and the content he viewed made it clear. He was fascinated by inflicting pain on women. And with Lauren just days away from moving out of the apartment complex, prosecutors believed he acted out of desperation. He couldn't stand the thought of losing sight of her forever. Either way, his confession sealed his fate. Stephen McDaniel was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole in 2041. 4 years later, he filed an appeal, and this time, he decided to represent himself. He argued that police had violated his rights from the very beginning, yelling at him during interrogation, refusing to let him use the bathroom without permission, and even denying him medical help during what he claimed was a seizure, unless he allowed them to search his apartment. He also accused his former attorney of failing to defend him properly. The lawyer, in turn, responded that Stephen had been given a remarkably good deal, life with a chance of parole instead of a death sentence, and that no attorney could have done better under the circumstances. Despite his efforts, the appeal was denied. In 2022, Stephen filed yet another one, but that too was rejected. It's worth mentioning that some of his relatives still insist he was framed. His father even created a fundraising page to hire a new lawyer for him. But no one donated a single dollar, and the page was quickly taken down. So, Stephen remains behind bars to this day, still trying to overturn his conviction. But according to most legal experts, the odds are stacked against him, and it's almost certain he'll spend the rest of his life in prison. Share your thoughts on this story in the comments section. Today's case takes us to Colorado in 2020, but the details, unfortunately, harken back to a brutal murder that took place in California 5 decades earlier. The details surrounding this case are far less well known, yet some are chillingly similar and equally strange. Let's take a look. On Friday, July 3rd, just before 9:30 p.m., a call was placed to Denver 911 from a resident of an apartment building on North Oneida Street. The caller explained that a man had knocked on their door moments earlier, stating that they arrived at the unit upstairs to find their friend, who lived there, dead. "I went to Sonic, and then I went to my house, which is about Mount 6.7. And I was there the whole time until I just came back here. Walked inside. The back door was open. I walked inside, and I was like, no, no, no. And I walked in and I found you on the bedroom." 40-year-old Ariana Woke was found on her bedroom floor near the closet. The single mother of a young son was pronounced dead by paramedics upon their arrival. She had suffered nearly 20 stab wounds, many to her back and neck. The friend who had discovered Ariana told officers on scene that she had been struggling recently with alcohol addiction. They were staying at the apartment temporarily to assist her sobriety. Ariana's son was with other family on the night of her death. That day, she had plans to attend a barbecue with her boyfriend. Earlier today, before I left, she was like, "Hey, you want to go with us to the park?" And I was like, "No, I need to go home. I haven't been able to change or do anything in 2 days." So I said, "I'm going." And she was supposed to be going to City Park to barbecue with her boyfriend. That's the last thing that I know. Officers then spoke with the neighbor who called 911. That individual had seen Ariana earlier in the day, and she had not been alone. The neighbor described the man that she saw with Ariana that night. "So what time today did you see him? Was it light outside? Dark outside?" "Yeah, I was closing my blinds about 4 to 9, and I saw him. I looked at the back window, and he was there, and he went around the back part. He came in through the gate, went into the gate and around to the end." "What did he look like? White guy, black guy, Hispanic guy, black, white, white. Okay." The downstairs neighbor told the officer on scene that the unknown man knocked on her door around 8:45 p.m. He wanted to speak with her about what he said was Ariana's strange behavior. He came downstairs twice and he asked me, "Can I come in and talk to you about her?" I said, "No, stand outside, talk to the door." And he says, "Well, I don't like the way she's acting. She's acting weird and everything. He thinks she's going to do something to herself because she wasn't. You know, acting strange." "Right." He said, "Okay." He went back upstairs, but he said he was leaving. "Okay." But like I said, a half an hour later, I guess I saw him in the back. But the dog was out there. So that was at 8:45. "You saw him?" "Yeah, about 4 to 9. So about 9. After stating that Ariana was a threat to herself, the man said he was leaving, except he didn't. The neighbor saw him in the backyard just a half an hour later, and he was shirtless. It was only 15 minutes after that. Ariana's friend found her on the bedroom floor. Ariana had lived on Oneida Street alone for only a short time. Her on-again, off-again boyfriend had moved out only a few months prior to her death. Described by friends as a sweet person and a loving mother, she was known for her generous spirit, her silliness, and positive personality. Ariana was born on Easy Street in Penn Valley, California, into a family that had experienced tragedy years before. In August 1969, her mother, Susan LaBerge, had discovered her own mother, Rosemary, and stepfather, Lino LaBianca, brutally murdered in their Los Angeles home, victims of Charles Manson and his followers. The LaBianca murders took place the night following the infamous killing of actress Sharon Tate and 4 of her companions. Manson was reportedly unhappy with how the Tate murders had gone down. Too much panic, insufficient weapons. So, the next night, he took the 4 murderers from the night before, as well as 2 more followers in search of another house to break into, and more people to murder. For reasons that are debated, he chose the home of Lino LaBianca, who was a wealthy grocery store executive. He and wife Rosemary, Ariana's grandmother, were brutally murdered. Rosemary was found in the living room, Lino in the bedroom. Each had been stabbed dozens of times. Ariana was born in 1979, 10 years after the killings. At 40 years old, she was just 2 years older than her grandmother had been when she too was stabbed to death in her home. Shortly after officers secured the scene and began interviewing witnesses, detectives arrived. They found what appeared to be a trail of blood beginning in the bedroom through the living room on the floor and leading into the kitchen. There was a folding knife with blood on it in the kitchen sink, as well as residue on the faucet. The obvious suspect was Ariana's sometimes boyfriend, a man named Patrick. Friends reported that she was meant to meet with him that day. There was also a history of domestic violence in their relationship. In fact, Patrick was on pretrial release from an incident that took place between the 2 of them in May of that year. Since then, he had been living out of his car. Patrick sat down with detectives the day following the murder. "Were you anywhere near the 09 Street address at all yesterday?" "Closest I was to Walgreens." "Okay. Yeah. What time was that?" 2, 3 o'clock. "Like right after that barbecue." "Did you have any contact with Ariana yesterday in person?" "Yeah, I did." "At the Walgreens?" "Yeah. At the Walgreens or another business nearby?" "Walgreens." "Okay. Can you do me a favor real quick? Can you put your hands out like that for me? And then can you turn your hands over?" Patrick told the detective that he spoke with Ariana briefly at a Walgreens the afternoon before she died. She seemed to have been drinking, he said, and was too inebriated to continue with their plans, so he left. He also introduced another line of inquiry. Patrick stated that Ariana was quick to make new friends. He claimed that she had a habit of inviting strangers back to her apartment. Often, these were individuals without a home of their own. According to Patrick, she befriended random people on the street. The thing with Ariana is if she gets intoxicated, she brings home people. Okay, vagrants. I mean, I used to be homeless, and so she would bring home people. And complete strangers and just put trust in them. What do you mean by that? Like, here's my debit card. Go to the store. No thought process when drinking about people taking advantage or doing stuff like that. So how often is she bringing people to the house? Frequently. Like daily. Okay. No, it was just like friendly. Like I'm trying to feed them, help them out type of. Okay. When Patrick encountered Ariana at the Walgreens, he said that she was with an unknown young man. They had just met on the street while on her way to the store only minutes before. Was she with anyone? She was intoxicated and she was with like a younger 20-year-old kid. What do you look like? Like the kind of flamboyant, dark hair. White, black, Hispanic. Oh, white. You're saying flamboyant. Tell me what you mean. Like he just had like a gay or stylish haircut. I'm trying to not be derogatory. You're saying younger. Like how old? 20, she said. 20? She was like, oh, I met this gay 20-year-old. Blah, 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 blah. She was like, do you know what he was wearing? Might have had a red shirt. But I mean, I just briefly saw him. Did she introduce him? She did. But I don't remember his name. She met him supposedly walking from Oneida to Walgreens. While detectives spoke with Patrick, they also verified his alibi. One condition of his pretrial release was an ankle monitor. Pretrial services tracked Patrick's GPS from that device on the day of the murder and found that he was not at Ariana's address at any time. He was eliminated as a suspect in her murder. As strange as it seemed, He was not the only one to tell detectives that Ariana had a habit of inviting vagrants to her home. Returning to the neighbors in her building, they spoke with the son of one tenant who was frequently visiting the downstairs apartment. He not only confirmed that seeing Ariana with new people regularly was common, but he also described seeing a man that matched the description provided by Patrick. New faces all the time. That lives upstairs? She had new people every time. I mean, after Patrick left, boyfriend or whatever, after he left, she had so many people. Oh man, it's different guys every day. Did you see the neighbor at the house? Yes. She was coming from the liquor store, I guess. Okay. And she had a dog walking with a dog. Okay. Was she with anyone else at that time? No. Did you hear somebody else or see somebody else? I've seen this guy that I've never seen before. My mom said she's seen him before. Okay. What do you look like? It was a Mexican guy with a box foot. I seen them real good when, she fell down that stairs down there in the back door. I mean, her foot was way up on the top. I thought he had pushed her. Her foot was, from the top. It was her hand on the top. And I said, "Oh, did you push? Did you just push her?" And he said, "No." And she said, "No, he's gay." No, that's not it. Surveillance video from a camera on East Colfax Avenue and North Monaco Street at 5:15 p.m. on July 3 showed Ariana walking eastbound on the street in the company of a man with black hair. Her friend's small dog walked with them. The man was wearing all black with bright red shoes. They were captured crossing the street and continuing in the direction of Ariana's apartment on Oneida. On Colfax Street, the two had entered a store that was equipped with internal security cameras. Still images from these cameras showed the man in black carrying a clear plastic Starbucks cup filled with a pink drink. He also had a distinctive tattoo on his left forearm. It was the Starbucks cup that detectives narrowed in on. One similar to it had been discarded on the front yard of Ariana's building and spotted by officers. That cup was later recovered from the lawn and sent for testing. Fingerprints pulled from the plastic returned a match. Jose Sandoval Romero. He was 24 years old with a matching build to the man in the surveillance. He had short, dark brown hair and a red tattoo on his arm, which appeared to match the one captured on camera. On July 7th, Jose was brought into the station for questioning. Unlike Patrick, who had no visible cuts or scratches on his hands or arms, Jose had two separate, partially healed cuts to his right hand. It was a telltale sign, consistent with a knife slipping as he made stabbing motions. These cuts were also thought to be the cause of the blood droplets observed on the living room and kitchen floors at the murder scene. Complaining of light sensitivity, Jose wore his sunglasses for most of the interview. He began by explaining how he had encountered Ariana that afternoon while she was arguing with Patrick. And then all of a sudden, this lady and this guy were fighting outside of a Walgreens. And the lady started coming up to me asking me, like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "Do I know you? Is that your boyfriend right there? Is he going to try to beat me up if I talk to you?" The boyfriend got out the car and, tried to talk to her. But she said that he had, like, a restraining order on her or something, or an ankle bracelet. And I was like, "You don't need to cry, it's okay." She just kept telling me that she wanted to put some type of drug in me, because she says that she does these type of drugs to herself. She says she puts frog poison in her body. And she says that she wanted me to go with her and do the same thing. And I told her, "No, I don't know nothing about that stuff. The Walgreens you're talking about is the one that's next to Frosted Leaf. Is that the Walgreens you're talking about?" "Yeah." "Okay. So you say you run into this lady and this guy. So they're arguing. So he ends up leaving. And then you guys." Jose said that after Patrick left, he and Ariana purchased food for a man they encountered in the alleyway. After that, he was compelled to help her home because she did not appear capable of getting there on her own. He continued to insist that he did not want to go with her, that her strange references to feeding him frog poison frightened him. From there, she kept stumbling on the ground, and she had a dog and a bunch of stuff carrying her. She was like, "I cannot make a home by myself. Please, you need to come with me." And I was like, "Miss, I really don't want to hang out with you. There's something wrong with you. You have so much stuff, and for some reason, you just keep stumbling on the ground. Jose did agree to help Ariana home. Once inside, he made her a cup of tea. He claimed to be unaware that she was intoxicated, primarily because he did not see her actually consume any alcohol. He did, however, know that something was not quite right. Let me make you some tea. Let me make you some coffee. Let me do anything to make you feel better. And I started making her coffee, tea. And she would just keep crying. And she would just keep trying to fight with me. And at some point, she just started, actually trying to fight with me. Then after that, I just kind of lost it. And, in there, it's kind of just self-said. The portion of the story that Jose believed was self-explanatory was that he proceeded to stab Ariana multiple times in the back. They had met only hours earlier. At first, the 24-year-old claimed that he had tried to leave. He went to the downstairs neighbor and told her that Ariana was acting strangely. He claimed this was in order to help her so he could leave knowing that the neighbor would check in on her later. And I went downstairs, told them they were, "Hey, this lady's crazy. I gotta go. There's something wrong with her. In a couple hours. Can you come and check up on her?" "I'm trying to go. I'm not trying to comfort this girl." I was like, "I'm trying to go. Can you please go and check up on her?" She's like, "You see, that's the thing about her is we're worried and we're scared of her and we don't know if we." She's like, "I'll just call the cops because I'm not going to be dealing with her." "Okay, that's not, I'm too old and this and that." And I'm like, "Okay, Miss Isle." But instead of leaving, he went back to the apartment. Then he said that Ariana began messing with his head. I don't know how she did it. She played me. She pretty much. I don't know why she fucking told me to go with her. This lady literally picked me up from the street and she made me feel bad. And every time I would leave her, she would stumble on the ground and make me feel bad. And every time I said, "No, I gotta go." And then she would stumble on the ground and cry. And she would just stumble on the ground and cry. And I don't know. She just played me. She played me. But I pretty much played myself by listening to her. I'm telling you, she drugged me. She drugged me and she told me. Jose told detectives a confusing cocktail of motives for the killing. His overarching assertion was that Ariana convinced him to kill her. He claimed they came to an agreement about it and that in a matter of only a few hours, he came to believe it was the only way to help her. But he played with the idea that he was defending himself by claiming that she threatened him, that her boyfriend was on his way to the apartment with another man and they planned to kill him. Finally, he asserted that Ariana had abruptly turned violent, at one point coming at him with the. He managed to fight her off, though the attack made him angry. So he used the knife to stab Ariana. And the only way to help her was apparently her crazy way. To help kill her? Yeah. So when she's talking to you about that, you're telling me, and again, correct me if I'm not understanding you. What you're saying is you thought the only way to help her was to kill her. She was going to have her boyfriend show up, and then she called her boyfriend, and I don't know what they talked about, but she pretty much told me that. We were going to die that day. Okay. She talked me into it, and I listened. That's it. Why didn't you call 911? Because she told me her boyfriend and her gay boyfriend's friend was going to come and kill me. They had this plan. So instead you killed her? She wanted to kill me. So when you stabbed her, is it because you were trying to help her or because you were mad? It was both. That's the only way you can get mixed up. Jose approached Ariana when she entered her bedroom and was walking towards her closet. He claimed he stabbed her twice. So you said when she walks into the bedroom, she's walking to her closet. Is that the first time you stab her? So she's facing away from you? She's walking to the. Yeah, after she pretty much took the knife out and pretty much tried to stab me and stumbled, I took it away. And then she walks into the bedroom towards the closet. Yes. You follow her into the bedroom. And then that's the first time you stab her? Amham. So she's facing her closet and you're behind her. She was running for something. Yes. After the murder, Jose fled the scene and disposed of evidence. He stripped off all of his clothing as he left the apartment and threw them in a nearby dumpster along with his shoes. He spent the next several days at his mother's house watching the door, waiting to see if law enforcement would find him. If you have enough thought to get rid of your bloody clothes because you're like, I got blood all over my clothes because I just stabbed this woman to death. That I think you understood what you were doing. We both understood what we were doing. And do me a favor. Take those glasses off. I don't think you're giving us the whole truth. I think you're trying to spin it a little about this. Well, she convinced me. She made me. How old are you? 24 years old, right? Yes. And who can make you do anything? Nobody. Right. So nobody made you stab her. Nobody made me stab her. You decided to stab her. While she talked me into it. You guys will never believe it because how could you guys believe it? Because I can't get talked into killing somebody. No. People can't get talked into killing people. You were trying to paint this in a picture that makes it most acceptable. No. I'm not. What happened here is you stabbed this poor drunk lady about 20 times while she was down on her bedroom floor. It's one of the worst stabbings I've seen in my 23 years of law enforcement. And then you're smart enough to get out of there, destroy the evidence, evade our efforts to locate you, and come down to the Springs. Following his confession, Jose Sandoval Romero pleaded guilty to the murder. In early 2023, he was sentenced to 48 years in prison. His earliest date of release is in July 2055. Ariana's mother, Susan, was 72 years old when her daughter was murdered. She told media outlets at the time that she was grieving the loss of her daughter and was too upset to comment. A GoFundMe page was created by Ariana's sister, Rummy, to help raise money to bring her body back to California. She also set up a separate fundraiser to help create a trust fund for Ariana's young son. And that was the tragic case of Ariana Woke. Share your thoughts about this story in the comments section and don't forget to press the like button if you enjoyed my video. Callum Thorne and Evelyn Russo were the epitome of young love. Both 20 years old, they seemed destined for each other from the moment they met. Callum, with his boyish charm and ambitious spirit, had just started his own landscaping business. His rugged good looks and kind heart made him popular among the locals, but he had eyes for only one person. Evelyn, on the other hand, was a vision of grace and beauty. With flowing hair and piercing eyes, she turned heads wherever she went. A talented artist, she dreamed of opening her own gallery one day. Her creativity and passion for life were infectious, drawing people to her like moths to a flame. Their paths crossed on a crisp autumn evening at the annual Millbrook Harvest Festival. Callum was volunteering at the pumpkin carving station, his strong hands skillfully guiding children as they created their masterpieces. Evelyn, manning the face-painting booth, couldn't help but notice the gentle giant with the infectious laugh. As fate would have it, they found themselves cleaning up side by side as the festival wound down. Their conversation flowed effortlessly, punctuated by shy glances and nervous laughter. By the end of the night, they had exchanged numbers and made plans to meet for coffee the following week. From that moment on, Callum and Evelyn were inseparable. Their relationship blossomed at a dizzying pace, fueled by the intensity of young love and the excitement of finding a kindred spirit. They spent their days exploring the hidden gems of Millbrook, from secluded hiking trails to quaint cafes tucked away in corners of the town. Evenings were filled with long conversations about their hopes and dreams. Callum spoke passionately about expanding his business, while Evelyn shared her sketches and paintings, her eyes lighting up as she described the emotions behind each piece. They supported each other's ambitions wholeheartedly, each believing they had found their perfect match. Their families and friends marveled at the strength of their connection. It was as if they had known each other for years rather than months. Evelyn's parents, Thomas and Maria Russo, welcomed Callum with open arms, seeing in him the son they never had. Callum's widowed mother, Fiona Thorne, was equally enamored with Evelyn, grateful that her son had found someone who brought such joy to his life. As winter turned to spring, their love only grew stronger. They began making plans for the future, talking about where they might live, how many children they wanted, and the adventures they would embark on together. It seemed that nothing could dampen their enthusiasm for the life they were building. On a warm evening in May, just 6 months after they had met, Callum got down on one knee in the very spot where they had first talked at the Harvest Festival. With tears in his eyes, he asked Evelyn to be his wife. Without hesitation, she said yes, sealing their commitment with a kiss that held the promise of forever. Little did they know that their fairy tale was about to take a dark turn, one that would test the very foundations of their love and trust in ways they could never have imagined. The news of Callum and Evelyn's engagement spread through Millbrook like wildfire. The town buzzed with excitement, eager to celebrate the union of two of its most beloved young residents. The couple wasted no time in diving headfirst into wedding planning, their enthusiasm palpable as they discussed every detail of their special day. Evelyn threw herself into the preparations with gusto. She spent hours poring over bridal magazines, creating mood boards, and visiting venues. Her artistic eye came in handy as she meticulously coordinated color schemes and floral arrangements. Callum, while less interested in the finer details, was happy to support Evelyn's vision, offering input when asked and ensuring that his bride-to-be had everything she desired. As the weeks passed, however, subtle changes began to creep into their relationship. Evelyn, once so open and affectionate, started to become distant and preoccupied. She would spend long hours on her phone, quickly locking the screen whenever Callum entered the room. Her explanations of wedding-related calls and messages rang hollow, leaving Callum with a nagging sense of unease. Their once frequent date nights became increasingly rare, with Evelyn citing wedding stress and the need to finalize details as reasons for canceling plans. When they did spend time together, she seemed distracted, her mind clearly elsewhere. Callum tried to brush off his concerns, attributing her behavior to pre-wedding jitters and the pressure of planning such a significant event. Friends and family noticed the shift as well. Evelyn's best friend Zoe remarked on how Evelyn no longer gushed about Callum the way she used to. Callum's mother Fiona sensed a tension between the couple that hadn't been there before. She gently probed her son, asking if everything was all right. But Callum brushed off her concerns with a forced smile and reassurances that all was well. As the wedding day drew nearer, Callum's doubts grew stronger. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. Late one night, as Evelyn slept soundly beside him, he found himself staring at the ceiling, a knot of anxiety tightening in his chest. He loved Evelyn with all his heart, but a voice in the back of his mind whispered that perhaps she no longer felt the same way. Little did Callum know that his instincts were right on the mark. The woman lying next to him, the one he had chosen to spend his life with, was harboring a secret that would soon shatter their world and set in motion a chain of events that would end in tragedy. As Callum grappled with his growing doubts, a new figure entered the scene, one who would play a pivotal role in the unfolding drama. Garrett Blackwood, a renowned wedding photographer, came highly recommended by several of Millbrook's elite families. At 50 years old, Garrett exuded a magnetic charm that belied his age. His salt and pepper hair and piercing eyes gave him a distinguished appearance, while his quick wit and smooth demeanor made him instantly likable. Garrett had made a name for himself, capturing the most intimate moments of couples' special days. His portfolio was impressive, featuring stunning shots that seemed to capture not just images, but emotions. When Evelyn stumbled upon his work online, she was immediately captivated. She convinced Callum that Garrett was the only choice for their wedding photographer, insisting that his artistic vision aligned perfectly with her own. Their first meeting with Garrett took place at a trendy cafe in downtown Millbrook. From the moment he walked in, his presence commanded attention. He greeted the couple with a warm smile and a firm handshake, his eyes lingering on Evelyn a fraction longer than necessary. As they discussed the wedding plans, Garrett's focus seemed to be primarily on the bride-to-be, hanging on her every word and offering enthusiastic praise for her ideas. Callum, initially impressed by Garrett's portfolio and professionalism, found himself feeling increasingly uncomfortable as the meeting progressed. He couldn't quite put his finger on why, but something about the way Garrett interacted with Evelyn set him on edge. He brushed it off as artistic camaraderie, trying to convince himself that he was reading too much into innocent interactions. As they left the cafe, Evelyn couldn't stop talking about how perfect Garrett was for their wedding. She gushed about his vision, his talent, and how lucky they were to have secured his services. Callum nodded along, pushing down the twinge of jealousy that threatened to surface. In the weeks that followed, Garrett became a frequent presence in their lives. He insisted on multiple meetings to discuss shot lists, lighting, and locations. Each time, Evelyn seemed to grow more animated and excited about the photography aspect of the wedding. She began to suggest additional photo sessions, including an engagement shoot and a boudoir session as a surprise for Callum. Garrett's charm extended beyond the couple. At a pre-wedding dinner with both families, he regaled everyone with tales of his travels and the celebrities he had photographed. Evelyn's parents were particularly taken with him, praising his sophistication and worldliness. Even Callum's mother, Fiona, found herself warming to Garrett's charismatic personality. As the wedding day approached, Garrett's influence on the proceedings grew. He suggested changes to the venue layout to optimize lighting, advised on the timing of events to capture the best moments, and even offered input on Evelyn's choice of dress. With each suggestion, Evelyn became more enthralled, while Callum felt increasingly sidelined in his own wedding plans. Little did anyone know that behind Garrett's professional facade and charming smile lurked a man with his own agenda, one that would soon threaten to destroy not just a wedding, but lives. The spark that ignited the affair between Evelyn and Garrett was as unexpected as it was intense. It happened during a routine meeting to discuss the wedding photo locations. Callum, tied up with an emergency at work, couldn't make it, leaving Evelyn to meet Garrett alone at a picturesque spot by Millbrook Lake. As they walked along the shore, scouting for the perfect backdrop, their conversation drifted from wedding plans to more personal topics. Garrett, with his worldly experience and smooth talking, captivated Evelyn. He spoke of his travels, the art he had seen, and the life he had lived, all things that resonated deeply with Evelyn's artistic soul, and her dreams of a life beyond Millbrook. In a moment of vulnerability, Evelyn confessed her fears about settling down so young, her doubts about whether she was truly ready for marriage. Garrett listened intently, offering understanding and empathy. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the lake, Garrett gently tucked a strand of hair behind Evelyn's ear. The touch, innocent as it seemed, sent a jolt of electricity through both of them. Their eyes met, and in that instant, a line was crossed. The kiss that followed was passionate and forbidden, awakening feelings in Evelyn that she had never experienced before. When they finally broke apart, breathless and guilty, they knew that everything had changed. The affair escalated quickly from there. Evelyn and Garrett began meeting in secret, using the pretense of wedding preparations to steal moments alone. They would rendezvous at out-of-town cafes, secluded spots in the nearby forest, and even in Garrett's studio under the guise of planning the boudoir shoot. Each encounter left Evelyn feeling more alive and conflicted. The passion she felt with Garrett was intoxicating, unlike anything she had experienced with Callum. Garrett made her feel sophisticated, understood, and desired in a way that thrilled and terrified her in equal measure. For Garrett, Evelyn represented a chance to recapture his youth. Her beauty, innocence, and enthusiasm reminded him of the women he had loved and lost in his younger days. He knew the affair was wrong, that he was potentially destroying a young couple's future. But he couldn't bring himself to end it. As the affair deepened, Evelyn found herself pulling away from Callum. She made excuses to avoid intimacy, claiming stress and exhaustion from wedding planning. When they were together, her mind was often elsewhere, replaying moments with Garrett or planning their next clandestine meeting. Callum, sensing the growing distance between them, tried desperately to reconnect. He planned surprise dates, wrote her love notes, and even suggested they take a break from wedding planning to focus on their relationship. But Evelyn, consumed by her secret passion, found herself unable to reciprocate his efforts fully. The guilt ate away at Evelyn. There were moments when she considered confessing everything to Callum, moments when she resolved to end things with Garrett. But each time she saw Garrett, all her resolve crumbled. The thrill of their forbidden romance was too strong to resist. As the wedding day drew nearer, the stakes grew higher. Evelyn knew she had to make a decision, but found herself paralyzed by indecision. She loved Callum, or at least she thought she did. But the passion she felt for Garrett was undeniable. The idea of walking down the aisle to Callum while harboring these secrets filled her with dread. Garrett, for his part, began to pressure Evelyn to call off the wedding. He painted pictures of the life they could have together, traveling the world, pursuing their artistic passions, living a life free from the constraints of small-town expectations. His words were a siren song to Evelyn, tempting her with a future that seemed both thrilling and terrifying. As the days ticked down to the wedding, the tension mounted. Evelyn knew that soon, she would have to face the consequences of her actions. Little did she know that fate, and Callum, had other plans. As Evelyn became more deeply entangled in her affair with Garrett, Callum's initial doubts blossomed into full-fledged suspicion. The changes in Evelyn were too significant to ignore: her emotional distance, her constant preoccupation with her phone, and the way she seemed to light up whenever Garrett's name was mentioned. Determined to understand what was happening, Callum tried to communicate with Evelyn. He initiated conversations about their relationship, asking if she was having second thoughts about the wedding. Evelyn's responses were always the same: reassurances that she was just stressed about the wedding preparations and that everything was fine. But her words rang hollow, lacking the sincerity and warmth that had once characterized their interactions. Unsatisfied with Evelyn's explanations, Callum began to pay closer attention to her behavior. He noticed how she would abruptly end phone calls when he entered the room, the way her eyes would dart nervously when asked about her whereabouts, and the increasing frequency of her meetings with Garrett. One evening, as they lay in bed, Callum reached out to hold Evelyn, only to have her flinch away from his touch. The pain of that reflexive rejection was a turning point for Callum. He knew then that he couldn't ignore his instincts any longer. Reluctantly, Callum began to gather evidence. He felt ashamed of his actions, but the need to know the truth overrode his guilt. He started by checking Evelyn's phone records, noting the frequent calls and texts to a number he didn't recognize. He drove by Garrett's studio at odd hours, his heart sinking when he saw Evelyn's car parked outside, long after their scheduled meeting should have ended. The final piece of evidence came in the form of a forgotten receipt. While doing laundry, Callum found a crumpled paper in Evelyn's jacket pocket, a bill from a hotel in the next town over. The date coincided with a day Evelyn had claimed to be visiting her cousin. As the reality of Evelyn's betrayal sank in, Callum was overwhelmed with a mixture of anger, hurt, and disbelief. The woman he loved, the one he had planned to spend his life with, had been lying to him for months. The future he had envisioned, their home, their family, their shared dreams, seemed to crumble before his eyes. Torn between confronting Evelyn and gathering more evidence, Callum found himself at a crossroads. Should he call off the wedding based on his suspicions? Confront Evelyn and demand the truth? Or wait and see if she would come clean on her own? As the wedding day loomed ever closer, Callum knew he had to make a decision. Little did he know that the choice he would make would set in motion a series of events that would change everyone's lives forever. The night before the wedding, Callum found himself unable to sleep, his mind racing with doubts and suspicions. As dawn broke, he made a fateful decision. He needed to know the truth, once and for all, before he stood at the altar. With shaking hands, he picked up Evelyn's phone from the nightstand. She had always guarded it closely, but in her exhausted state the night before, she had forgotten to set the passcode. Guilt gnawed at him as he opened her messages, but the need for answers overpowered his moral hesitation. What he found shattered his world. Messages between Evelyn and Garrett filled the screen, leaving no doubt about the nature of their relationship. Intimate photos, declarations of love, and plans for their future together after the wedding was called off. It was all there in black and white. Callum's hands trembled as he scrolled through months of deception. He read about secret rendezvous, passionate encounters, and worst of all, Evelyn's doubts about marrying him. In one particularly painful exchange, Evelyn had written to Garrett, "I love you in a way I never loved Callum. You make me feel alive." As the full extent of the betrayal sank in, Callum felt a wave of nausea wash over him. He stumbled to the bathroom, barely making it before he emptied the contents of his stomach. The sound of his retching woke Evelyn, who called out to him in concern. Gathering himself, Callum returned to the bedroom. Evelyn sat up in bed, her face etched with worry as she took in his pale complexion and red-rimmed eyes. She asked what was wrong, reaching out to touch his arm. Callum recoiled from her touch as if burned. In that moment, looking at the woman he had loved and trusted, Callum felt a surge of anger unlike anything he had ever experienced. He held up her phone, his voice low and dangerous as he asked, "How long?" Evelyn's face drained of color as she realized what had happened. She started to speak, to offer explanations and excuses, but Callum cut her off. He didn't want to hear it. The evidence was irrefutable. As the reality of the situation sank in, Evelyn broke down in tears, begging Callum to understand, to forgive her. She claimed she had been confused, that she still loved him, but her words fell on deaf ears. Callum's mind was already racing ahead, thinking of the guests who would soon be arriving, the families who had traveled for the wedding, the life they had planned together, all of it built on a foundation of lies. In that moment, something shifted in Callum. The hurt and betrayal crystallized into a cold, hard resolve. He looked at Evelyn, the woman he had thought would be his wife, and made a decision that would alter the course of all their lives. "The wedding will go on," he said, his voice devoid of emotion, "but not the way you think." With those cryptic words, Callum left the room, leaving a stunned and tearful Evelyn behind. As he closed the door, he knew that the events he was about to set in motion would have consequences beyond anything he could imagine. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the emotional turmoil brewing beneath the surface. The Millbrook Community Church, a picturesque white building with a tall steeple, was adorned with flowers and ribbons. Guests began to arrive, dressed in their finest, unaware of the drama unfolding behind the scenes. In the groom's room, Callum sat alone, staring at his reflection in the mirror. Dark circles under his eyes betrayed his sleepless night, but his face was set in grim determination. His best man, Liam, entered the room, ready with jokes to calm pre-wedding jitters. He faltered when he saw Callum's expression, sensing that something was terribly wrong. Callum brushed off Liam's concerns, insisting that everything was fine. But as he mechanically went through the motions of getting ready, his mind was racing, replaying the shocking discoveries of the previous night and finalizing the plan he had formulated in the dark hours of the morning. Meanwhile, in the bridal suite, Evelyn was a bundle of nerves. Her bridesmaids fluttered around her, adjusting her gown and veil, oblivious to the real reason for her distress. Evelyn's eyes were red and puffy, which everyone attributed to emotional anticipation of the big day. Only she knew the truth, that her tears were born of guilt, fear, and confusion. As she was helped into her wedding dress, Evelyn's phone buzzed with a message. It was from Garrett, wishing her luck and expressing his love. The message only intensified her inner turmoil. She had spent the night torn between her feelings for Garrett and her commitment to Callum, unsure of how to proceed. Outside, guests continued to arrive. Callum's mother, Fiona, greeted people with a strained smile, unable to shake off the feeling that something was amiss with her son. Evelyn's parents, Thomas and Maria, beamed with pride, blissfully unaware of the storm about to break. Garrett arrived, camera in hand, ready to capture the day's events. His professional demeanor was in place, but those who looked closely might have noticed the tension in his jaw, the way his eyes darted around nervously. As the ceremony's start time approached, a palpable tension began to build. The wedding planner, sensing that something was off, tried to coordinate with both bride and groom, but found herself stonewalled at every turn. Guests took their seats in the church, an excited murmur filling the air. The organist began to play, signaling the start of the ceremony. Callum stood at the altar, his face an unreadable mask. The groomsmen exchanged worried glances, picking up on his unusual demeanor. The bridesmaids began their procession down the aisle, each step bringing the moment of truth closer. As the bridal march began to play, all eyes turned to the back of the church, expecting to see a radiant Evelyn. But Evelyn hesitated at the church doors, her father at her side. She felt as if she was standing on the edge of a precipice, knowing that once she took that first step down the aisle, there would be no turning back. Her father, mistaking her reluctance for normal nerves, gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. With a deep breath, Evelyn began her walk down the aisle. Each step felt like an eternity as she approached Callum. Their eyes met, and in that moment, she knew that he knew everything. The look in his eyes, a mixture of hurt, anger, and something else she couldn't quite identify, sent a chill down her spine. As Evelyn reached the altar and took her place beside Callum, the officiant began to speak. But before he could get more than a few words out, Callum raised his hand, silencing him. A hush fell over the church as all eyes turned to the groom, waiting to see what would happen next. The silence in the church was deafening as Callum turned to face the assembled guests. His voice, when he spoke, was calm, but carried to every corner of the building. "Friends, family, I want to thank you all for coming today," he began, his words measured and deliberate. "You're here to witness a union, a commitment of love and trust. But before we proceed, there's something you all need to know." Evelyn, standing beside him, felt her heart racing. She reached out to touch Callum's arm to stop him, but he shrugged off her hand without even looking at her. "For the past few months," Callum continued, his voice gaining strength, "the woman I thought I would spend my life with has been living a lie. She's been having an affair." A collective gasp rippled through the church. Evelyn's parents, seated in the front row, looked on in shock and disbelief. Fiona Thorne covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide with horror. "And not just with anyone," Callum went on, his gaze sweeping the crowd until it landed on Garrett, who stood frozen near the back of the church, camera forgotten in his hands. "With our wedding photographer, Garrett Blackwood." The reaction was immediate and chaotic. Guests turned in their seats, craning their necks to look at Garrett. Murmurs of shock and disgust filled the air. Evelyn's mother let out a strangled cry, while her father's face turned an alarming shade of red. Evelyn, her face ashen, tried to speak, but no words came out. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she looked frantically between Callum and the stunned congregation. Garrett, for his part, seemed to shrink under the collective gaze of the wedding guests. He took a step back, as if contemplating fleeing, but found his exit blocked by outraged attendees. "I discovered their betrayal last night," Callum continued, his voice now trembling with awe. With these words, Callum reached into his jacket and pulled out a stack of papers, printouts of messages and photos he had discovered on Evelyn's phone. He began to read aloud, his voice carrying clearly through the shocked silence of the church, laying bare every sordid detail of the affair. As Callum's revelations continued, the atmosphere in the church shifted from shock to anger. The day that was meant to celebrate love had turned into a public humiliation, and the tension in the air was palpable, ready to ignite at the slightest spark. As Callum's words hung in the air, the church erupted into chaos. Shouts of anger and disbelief filled the sacred space, drowning out the sobs of Evelyn and the protestations of Garrett. Evelyn's father, Thomas Russo, was the first to act. He lunged towards Garrett, his face contorted with rage. "You bastard," he roared, his fist connecting with Garrett's jaw in a sickening crunch. Garrett stumbled backward, crashing into a row of pews. The violent outburst seemed to break a dam, and suddenly the church was a sea of motion. Guests surged forward, some trying to restrain Thomas, others joining in his attack on Garrett. Women screamed, children cried, and the air was thick with the sound of shattering glass as vases and decorations were knocked over in the melee. Evelyn, still at the altar, collapsed to her knees, her pristine white dress pooling around her. She reached out towards Callum, begging him to stop, to take it all back. But Callum stood impassive, watching the chaos unfold with a detached expression. In the midst of the pandemonium, Garrett managed to break free from his attackers. Blooded and disoriented, he stumbled towards the exit. Evelyn, seeing him trying to escape, suddenly found her feet. In a moment of panic and desperation, she hitched up her dress and ran after him, pushing past shocked guests. Callum, seeing Evelyn flee, felt something snap inside him. The cold detachment that had sustained him through his revelation gave way to a white-hot rage. Without thinking, he took off in pursuit, shouldering past his best man who tried to hold him back. Outside the church, the bright sunlight was jarring after the dimness inside. Garrett had made it to his car and was fumbling with his keys when Evelyn caught up to him. She grabbed his arm, pleading with him, though for what she wasn't sure, to take her with him, to stay and face the consequences. Before Garrett could respond, Callum burst out of the church. The sight of Evelyn with Garrett, still in her wedding dress, was the final straw. With a roar of anguish and fury, Callum charged towards them. What happened next occurred so quickly that later, witnesses would give conflicting accounts. There was a scuffle, shouts, and then the sharp retort of a gunshot that cut through the air like a thunderclap. For a moment, everything went still. Then, Evelyn screamed, a sound of pure horror that would haunt those who heard it for years to come. As she crumpled to the ground, cradling Callum's motionless body, the full tragedy of the day became horrifyingly clear. The gunshot that rang out in front of Millbrook Community Church marked the violent end of what should have been a day of celebration. As the echo faded, it left in its wake a scene of unimaginable tragedy. Callum Thorne lay motionless on the ground, blood seeping through his crisp white shirt, staining it a deep crimson. Evelyn knelt beside him, her wedding dress now smeared with dirt and blood, her anguished cries piercing the air. Garrett Blackwood stood frozen, the smoking gun still in his hand, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. Within minutes, the quiet street was filled with the wail of sirens as police and paramedics rushed to the scene. Despite their best efforts, Callum was pronounced dead at the scene, the bullet having struck him directly in the heart. Garrett offered no resistance as he was handcuffed and led away, his eyes vacant, still struggling to comprehend what he had done. Evelyn, in a state of hysteria, had to be sedated before she could be moved from Callum's side. Garrett Blackwood was eventually convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 25 years in prison. Evelyn Russo, though not charged with any crime, faced the harsh judgment of the community and her own conscience. She eventually left Millbrook, unable to bear the weight of the memories and the accusing glances of her neighbors. Everett Blackwood, a successful 38-year-old financial advisor, was known for his charming smile and his ability to put clients at ease. His wife, Imogen, 35, balanced her role as a part-time yoga instructor with being a devoted mother. To their neighbors and friends, the Blackwoods epitomized the perfect family. But as with many picture-perfect facades, cracks began to form beneath the surface. The pressure to maintain their image of familial harmony had started to take its toll. Everett's long hours at the office and frequent business trips created a growing distance between him and Imogen. Meanwhile, Imogen found herself increasingly overwhelmed by the demands of motherhood and her part-time career. As summer approached, the Blackwoods faced a new challenge. Imogen's yoga classes were becoming more popular, and she was offered the opportunity to lead a teacher training program. The couple realized they needed help with childcare to maintain their busy schedules and keep their family life running smoothly. Little did they know that their decision to hire a babysitter would set in motion a chain of events that would shatter their seemingly perfect world and leave their community reeling in shock. Daisy Summers was not what one would typically expect of a seasoned babysitter. At 18, she was a recent high school graduate with dreams of becoming a renowned photographer. Her portfolio was filled with moody black-and-white portraits and vibrant street scenes that hinted at a talent beyond her years. Born to working-class parents in the neighboring town of Mill Creek, Daisy had always felt like an outsider among her peers. Her artistic sensibilities and quiet demeanor set her apart from the sports-obsessed culture of her high school. She saw babysitting as a means to an end, a way to save money for her planned gap year in Europe before starting art school. Daisy's aunt, who lived in Oak Ridge Heights, had mentioned to Imogen that her niece was looking for summer work. Intrigued by the idea of having a creative influence around her children, Imogen invited Daisy for an interview. From the moment Daisy stepped into the Blackwood home, there was a subtle shift in the atmosphere. Her long hair fell in waves around her heart-shaped face, and her deep eyes seemed to take in every detail of her surroundings. Everett, who happened to be working from home that day, found himself strangely drawn to the young woman's presence. During the interview, Daisy's quiet confidence and genuine interest in the children impressed Imogen. She spoke of her love for art and how she hoped to incorporate creative activities into her time with Phoebe and Jasper. Imogen was sold, and Daisy was hired on the spot. The first few weeks seemed to go smoothly. Daisy quickly became a favorite with the children, who were enchanted by her storytelling and art projects. Imogen relished the freedom to focus on her yoga career, knowing her kids were in capable hands. Everett, too, seemed more relaxed. He started coming home earlier, often timing his arrival to coincide with Daisy's presence. He would engage her in conversations about her photography, showing a level of interest that he rarely displayed towards Imogen's pursuits. At first, Imogen was pleased to see her husband taking an interest in their babysitter's life. She even encouraged Daisy to show Everett her portfolio, hoping his business connections might prove useful for the young artist's future. But as the summer wore on, subtle changes began to occur. Lingering glances, an increasing number of accidental encounters, and a growing tension in the air when Everett and Daisy were in the same room. Slowly, imperceptibly, the dynamics within the Blackwood household began to shift, setting the stage for a tragedy that would soon unfold. As July turned to August, Imogen Blackwood found herself increasingly uneasy in her own home. At first, she couldn't quite put her finger on what was bothering her. Everything seemed to be running smoothly. The children were happy, her yoga classes were thriving, and Everett appeared more engaged with family life than he had been in months. Yet, there was something in the air, a tension that she couldn't shake. It started with small observations. Everett lingering in the kitchen when Daisy was preparing snacks for the kids, or the way his eyes would follow the young babysitter as she moved around the house. Imogen tried to dismiss these thoughts, attributing them to her own insecurities. After all, Everett had always been a flirt, and his charm was part of what had attracted her to him in the first place. But as the days passed, she couldn't help but notice more. There was the time she came home early from a yoga class to find Everett and Daisy in deep conversation, their heads close together as they looked at something on Daisy's phone. They had sprung apart when Imogen entered, Daisy mumbling something about showing Everett her latest photographs. Then there were the changes in Everett himself. He had started paying more attention to his appearance, wearing cologne even on weekends and buying new clothes. When Imogen complimented him, he brushed it off, saying he just felt like a change. One evening, as they were getting ready for bed, Imogen casually mentioned that Daisy had seemed distracted lately. Everett's response was oddly defensive, quickly changing the subject to his upcoming business trip. The seed of doubt, once planted, began to grow. Imogen found herself paying closer attention to the interactions between her husband and the babysitter. She noticed how Daisy's cheeks would flush when Everett entered a room, the way her laugh seemed to linger a bit too long at his jokes. She saw how Everett would find excuses to be home when Daisy was there, claiming he needed to pick up documents or had forgotten his laptop. As her suspicions grew, Imogen's behavior began to change. She became more irritable with the children, snapping at them for small infractions. Her yoga students noticed a shift in her teaching style, commenting on her lack of focus and shortened meditation sessions. At night, Imogen lay awake, her mind racing with possibilities. Was she imagining things? Was she letting her own insecurities poison her marriage? Or was there really something going on between Everett and Daisy? She tried to rationalize her thoughts. Daisy was barely out of high school, and Everett was a responsible father and respected professional. Surely, he wouldn't risk everything for a fling with a teenager. And yet, the doubts persisted. Imogen considered confronting Everett, but feared what his reaction might reveal. Instead, she began to watch and wait, gathering mental notes of every interaction, every glance, every moment that seemed out of place. The weight of her suspicions pressed down on her, transforming the once peaceful Blackwood home into a pressure cooker of unspoken tensions and simmering emotions. Little did Imogen know that her worst fears were about to be confirmed, setting in motion a chain of events that would lead to an unthinkable tragedy. As summer reached its peak, the connection between Everett Blackwood and Daisy Summers deepened, fueled by stolen moments and shared secrets. For Everett, Daisy represented a breath of fresh air in his carefully controlled life. Her youthful energy and artistic passion awakened something in him that he thought had long been dormant. It began innocently enough. Everett would arrive home early, ostensibly to spend time with his children, but increasingly, he found himself engaging Daisy in conversation. They would discuss her photography, her dreams of traveling the world, and her unique perspective on life. Everett found himself captivated by her views, so different from the pragmatic world of finance he inhabited. Daisy, for her part, was drawn to Everett's worldliness and success. He represented everything she aspired to: confidence, financial security, and a life beyond the confines of her small-town upbringing. When he spoke about his work or his travels, She hung on every word, imagining herself in the glamorous world he described. Their conversations grew longer and more intimate. Everett began sharing his own unfulfilled dreams, of writing a novel, of leaving the corporate world behind. Daisy listened with rapt attention, offering encouragement and understanding that he felt had been lacking in his marriage. As their emotional connection deepened, physical tension began to build. Accidental touches lingered a moment too long. Eye contact became charged with unspoken desire. They found excuses to be in the same room, their bodies gravitating towards each other, even as they maintained a respectable distance. Everett knew what he was doing was wrong. He was a married man, a father, and Daisy was young enough to be his daughter. He tried to rationalize his feelings, telling himself it was just a harmless flirtation, a midlife crisis that would pass. But in quiet moments, when he lay awake next to a sleeping Imogen, he couldn't deny the growing intensity of his feelings for Daisy. Daisy, too, was conflicted. She had always prided herself on her maturity and independence, but now she found herself falling for a married man. She knew it was cliché, the babysitter and the dad, but she couldn't help the rush of excitement she felt every time Everett walked into the room. She told herself it was just a crush, that nothing would ever happen. But deep down, she longed for more. Their growing connection did not go unnoticed. The children, Phoebe and Jasper, picked up on the change in dynamics. They saw how their father's eyes would light up when Daisy arrived, how he would laugh more freely in her presence. Phoebe, perceptive beyond her years, once asked her mother why Daddy smiled differently at Daisy. Imogen had brushed off the question, but it added to her growing unease. As August wore on, Everett and Daisy's flirtation intensified. They began to manufacture reasons to be alone together. Everett would offer to drive Daisy home, taking the long road and parking in secluded spots to continue their conversations. Daisy would stay late after the children were in bed, claiming she was helping to tidy up, but really waiting for a moment alone with Everett. One evening, as they stood in the kitchen after everyone else had gone to bed, the tension between them reached a breaking point. Everett reached out to brush a strand of hair from Daisy's face, his hand lingering on her cheek. Daisy leaned into his touch, her heart racing. For a moment, they stood frozen, teetering on the edge of a line they both knew they shouldn't cross. It was Imogen's voice, calling from upstairs, that broke the spell. Everett and Daisy sprang apart, guilt and desire warring on their faces. As Daisy hurriedly gathered her things to leave, they exchanged a look that said more than words ever could. They both knew that whatever was happening between them had gone too far to ignore. The pivotal moment came on a sweltering day in late August. Imogen had taken the children to visit her parents for the weekend, leaving Everett alone in the house. He had told her he needed to catch up on work, but in reality, he had other plans. Daisy arrived under the pretense of picking up some art supplies she had left behind. The air was thick with anticipation, as Everett invited her inside. They stood in the foyer, the tension between them palpable. Then, as if drawn by an invisible force, they came together in a passionate embrace. Their first kiss was electric, years of pent-up desire and forbidden longing pouring out in a single moment. Everett's hands tangled in Daisy's hair as she pressed herself against him. All thoughts of propriety and consequences forgot. What followed was a whirlwind of passion and guilt. They made love frantically, desperately, as if trying to make up for lost time. Afterwards, lying tangled in the sheets of the guest bedroom, neither could bring themselves to use the marital bed. Reality began to set in. Everett was consumed by conflicting emotions. The exhilaration of new love warred with the crushing weight of guilt. He thought of Imogen, of their children, of the life they had built together. But when he looked at Daisy, her youthful beauty glowing in the afternoon light, he felt alive in a way he hadn't in years. Daisy, for her part, was overwhelmed by the intensity of her feelings. She had never experienced anything like this before. The thrill of being with an older, experienced man was intoxicating. Yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was betraying Imogen, who had always been kind to her. Despite their misgivings, neither Everett nor Daisy could bring themselves to end the affair. They began to meet in secret, stealing moments whenever they could. A quick kiss in the laundry room while Imogen was upstairs with the children. Hushed phone calls late at night. Clandestine meetings in out-of-the-way cafes where they were unlikely to be recognized. The risk of discovery only added to the excitement. Every shared glance, every brush of hands when passing in the hallway, was charged with secret meaning. They developed a code, innocuous phrases that held hidden significance. When Daisy mentioned a new photography project, it was a signal that she wanted to meet. When Everett talked about a challenging client, it meant he couldn't get away. As their affair deepened, both Everett and Daisy began to fantasize about a future together. Everett imagined leaving Imogen, starting a new life with Daisy by his side. He pictured introducing her to his colleagues as his partner, watching her photography career blossom with his support. Daisy dreamed of traveling the world with Everett, of gallery openings where he would proudly stand by her side. But these fantasies were always tempered by the harsh light of reality. Everett knew that leaving his family would devastate his children and potentially ruin his career. Daisy, in her more lucid moments, recognized the naivety of her dreams. She was barely out of high school, with her whole life ahead of her. Was she really ready to become a stepmother, to deal with the fallout of a messy divorce? Still, they persisted in their affair, each encounter leaving them craving more. They became reckless, taking greater risks to be together. Everett began to invent business trips, booking into local hotels where Daisy would meet him. Daisy lied to her parents about where she was spending her nights, creating elaborate cover stories to hide her true whereabouts. The strain began to show in other areas of their lives. Everett's work suffered as he spent more and more time orchestrating his meetings with Daisy. He became distracted in meetings, missed deadlines, and his once stellar reputation began to tarnish. Daisy's plans for her gap year fell by the wayside as she focused all her energy on her relationship with Everett. Her photography, once her passion, became a distant second to the all-consuming nature of their affair. As summer began to wane, Everett and Daisy's relationship intensified. They became more daring, more desperate in their encounters. The thrill of secrecy was wearing off, replaced by a gnawing desire to be together openly. Neither of them realized that their carefully constructed web of lies was about to unravel, with consequences more dire than either could have imagined. As autumn leaves began to fall, Imogen Blackwood's suspicions reached a fever pitch. The nagging doubt that had plagued her all summer had crystallized into a cold, hard certainty. Something was definitely going on between her husband and the babysitter. Determined to uncover the truth, Imogen embarked on a covert investigation. She began by scrutinizing Everett's behavior more closely. She noted the late nights at the office, the sudden business trips, the hushed phone conversations that abruptly ended when she entered the room. Each observation was a piece in a puzzle she was terrified to complete. Imogen's first concrete step was to check Everett's phone records. She waited until he was in the shower one morning, then quickly scrolled through his call history. Her heart sank as she saw Daisy's number appearing with alarming frequency, often late at night or early in the morning. Next, she turned her attention to Everett's computer. She felt a twinge of guilt as she opened his laptop, but her need to know overpowered her scruples. It didn't take long to find what she was looking for. In Everett's email, she discovered a trail of messages between him and Daisy, thinly veiled under the guise of discussing her photography portfolio. The language was carefully neutral, but Imogen could read between the lines. References to meetings and private critiques made her stomach churn. As her investigation deepened, Imogen found herself transforming into someone she barely recognized. She installed a hidden camera in the living room, justifying it as necessary to protect her family. She began following Everett, parking down the street from his office, and watching who came and went. She even considered hiring a private investigator, but couldn't bring herself to involve an outsider in her family's turmoil. The emotional toll of her sleuthing was immense. Imogen's yoga classes suffered as she struggled to maintain her calm, centered persona while her inner world was in chaos. She found herself snapping at the children more often, then drowning in guilt over her short temper. Sleep became elusive, her nights filled with vivid nightmares of Everett and Daisy together. Despite the mounting evidence, a small part of Imogen still clung to the hope that she was misinterpreting everything. Perhaps Everett was just mentoring Daisy, taking a fatherly interest in her career. But deep down, she knew this was wishful thinking. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Imogen had told Everett she would be teaching a workshop all day, but in reality, she had cancelled her classes to follow him. She watched from her car as Everett met Daisy at a small cafe on the outskirts of town. Through the window, she saw them holding hands across the table, their faces close together in intimate conversation. As tears blurred her vision, Imogen realized that her worst fears had been confirmed. The life she had built, the family she cherished, was built on a foundation of lies. In that moment, something inside her hardened. The hurt and betrayal crystallized into a cold, implacable resolve. Wiping away her tears, Imogen started the car and drove home, her mind racing with possibilities. She now had all the evidence she needed. The question was, what was she going to do with it? That evening, as Everett returned home, the tension in the air was palpable. Imogen sat at the kitchen table, a glass of red wine in front of her, her face a mask of calm that belied the storm raging within. As Everett hung up his coat, she spoke, her voice eerily controlled. "Everett, we need to talk about Daisy." The color drained from Everett's face, but he quickly composed himself. He forced a casual tone as he asked what she meant. Imogen's eyes narrowed as she laid out her evidence. The phone records, the emails, the clandestine meetings. With each revelation, Everett's denials grew weaker, more desperate. He tried to gaslight her, accusing her of paranoia and invading his privacy. But Imogen stood firm, her voice rising as she described what she had seen at the cafe. Everett's facade crumbled, replaced by a mixture of guilt and defiance. "You don't understand, Imogen. Daisy and we have a connection. She sees me in a way you haven't in years." Imogen's carefully maintained composure shattered. She lashed out, hurling accusations and insults. How could he betray their family? What about their children? Did their years together mean nothing? Everett's responses swung between remorse and justification. He spoke of feeling trapped, of rediscovering passion with Daisy. He claimed he still loved Imogen, that he never meant to hurt her. But his words rang hollow in the face of his actions. As the argument escalated, neither noticed Phoebe standing in the doorway, wide-eyed and trembling. It was only when she burst into tears that her parents realized she was there. The sight of their daughter's distress momentarily united them as they rushed to comfort her. In the aftermath of the confrontation, an uneasy truce settled over the Blackwood household. Everett promised to end things with Daisy, to recommit to their marriage. Imogen, exhausted and emotionally drained, agreed to try and work things out for the sake of their children. But as they lay in bed that night, a chasm between them, both knew that things would never be the same. The trust that had been the foundation of their marriage was irreparably damaged. And unbeknownst to Everett, the seeds of a far darker plan were already taking root in Imogen's mind. In the days following the confrontation, a suffocating tension permeated every corner of the Blackwood home. Everett and Imogen moved around each other like wary strangers, their interactions stilted and formal. The children, picking up on the undercurrent of hostility, became clingy and irritable. Imogen watched Everett like a hawk, noting every phone call, every late night at the office. She vacillated between bitter anger and desperate hope, clinging to Everett's promises to recommit to their family. But deep down, a part of her knew it was too late. The damage had been done, and the idyllic life she had worked so hard to build was crumbling around her. Everett, for his part, found himself torn between guilt and resentment. He tried to focus on his family, to recapture the love he had once felt for Imogen. But thoughts of Daisy continually intruded, her youthful passion a stark contrast to the Cold War at home. Despite his promises, he couldn't bring himself to cut off contact with Daisy completely. The breaking point came on a crisp October evening. Imogen had planned a family dinner, a last-ditch effort to salvage their fractured relationships. She had spent hours cooking Everett's favorite meal, even enlisting the children's help to set the table. But as the hours ticked by and Everett's chair remained empty, her hope turned to ash. When Everett finally stumbled through the door well past midnight, the the scent of unfamiliar perfume clinging to his clothes. Something in Imogen snapped. The carefully constructed facade of forgiveness and reconciliation shattered, revealing the raw, seething fury beneath. The ensuing argument was brutal, years of pent-up resentment and betrayal pouring out in a torrent of accusations and recriminations. Imogen screamed about sacrificing her career for their family, about the years she had spent supporting Everett's ambitions. Everett retaliated by painting Imogen as controlling and suffocating, claiming she had stifled his dreams and individuality. As their voices rose, so did the stakes of their argument. Everett, pushed to his limit, finally admitted that he was in love with Daisy. The words hung in the air, like a death knell for their marriage. Imogen, her world collapsing around her, made a desperate ultimatum: Daisy or his family. Everett's hesitation was all the answer Imogen needed. In that moment, something fundamental changed within her. The last vestiges of the woman she had been, the devoted wife, the loving mother, withered away, replaced by a cold, implacable resolve. As Everett continued to talk, making promises they both knew he wouldn't keep, Imogen retreated into herself. She nodded mechanically, letting him believe he had won her over. But behind her eyes, a plan was forming, a dark, twisted path that would lead to unimaginable tragedy. That night, as Everett slept fitfully beside her, Imogen lay awake, her mind racing. She thought about the life she had built, the dreams she had sacrificed, the love she had poured into her family, and she thought about Daisy, the young woman who had so casually destroyed everything. In the cold light of dawn, Imogen made her decision. If she couldn't have the life she had worked so hard for, then neither would Daisy. With a clarity that should have frightened her, Imogen began to plot her revenge. She would make them pay, Everett for his betrayal, Daisy for her youth and beauty, both of them for the happiness they had found in each other's arms. As she finally drifted off to sleep, a small, mirthless smile played on Imogen's lips. They had no idea what was coming. But soon, very soon, they would learn the true cost of their affair. The plan came together with a frightening ease. Imogen moved through the following days in a haze of cold determination, her every action calculated and deliberate. She maintained a facade of normalcy, even managing to convince Everett that she was coming to terms with the situation. On a chilly Saturday morning, Imogen put her plan into motion. She suggested that Everett take the children to visit his parents for the weekend, claiming she needed some time alone to process everything. Relieved by her apparent acceptance, Everett readily agreed. As soon as the car disappeared down the street, Imogen sprang into action. She called Daisy, her voice carefully modulated to sound warm and conciliatory. She invited the young woman over, saying she wanted to clear the air between them. Daisy, caught off guard by the unexpected olive branch, hesitated before accepting. As she made her way to the Blackwood home, a mix of hope and apprehension swirled in her chest. Perhaps, she thought, there was a way to resolve this situation amicably. When Daisy arrived, Imogen greeted her with a brittle smile. She ushered the young woman into the kitchen, where a bottle of wine and 2 glasses waited. As they talked, Imogen's manner was eerily calm. She spoke of forgiveness, of understanding the heart's folly. With each sip of wine, Daisy felt herself relaxing, believing that perhaps everything would work out. It was only when Daisy's vision began to blur that she realized something was terribly wrong. As she struggled to stand, panic rising in her throat, she saw Imogen's mask of friendliness melt away, replaced by a look of cold, implacable hatred. What happened next was a blur of violence and terror. Imogen, driven by a rage that had been building for months, lashed out with a brutality that shocked even herself. The kitchen, once a place of family gatherings and laughter, became the scene of an unthinkable crime. In the aftermath, Imogen stood over Daisy's motionless form, her hands shaking and her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The reality of what she had done crashed over her in waves, each one threatening to drown her in horror and regret. But it was too late to turn back. With a detachment that would later horrify her, Imogen began to clean up the evidence of her crime. She worked methodically, her mind oddly clear as she erased all traces of Daisy's presence from the house. As night fell, Imogen made one final call to the police. Her voice trembling with manufactured fear, she reported Daisy missing. She spun a tale of the young woman failing to show up for her babysitting duties, of calls gone unanswered, and a gnawing worry in her gut. As she hung up the phone, Imogen caught a glimpse of herself in the hallway mirror. The woman who stared back at her was a stranger, hollow-eyed and haunted, with blood-stained hands and a soul irreparably damaged by the weight of her actions. In that moment, Imogen realized that in her quest for vengeance, she had destroyed not just Daisy's life, but her own as well. The tragedy she had set in motion would have far-reaching consequences, forever altering the lives of everyone involved. The disappearance of Daisy Summers sent shockwaves through the quiet community of Oak Ridge Heights. As news spread, neighbors gathered in small groups, their hushed conversations a mix of concern and morbid speculation. The Blackwood home, once a symbol of suburban perfection, became the epicenter of a growing storm. As the investigation intensified, cracks began to appear in Imogen's carefully constructed alibi. Surveillance footage from a nearby gas station contradicted her account of her movements on the day of Daisy's disappearance. Inconsistencies in her statements raised red flags for the seasoned detectives working the case. The breakthrough came when a hiker discovered Daisy's phone in a wooded area on the outskirts of town. The device, while damaged, yielded a treasure trove of information, including text messages that painted a clear picture of her relationship with Everett. With this new evidence, the focus of the investigation shifted dramatically. Everett found himself the prime suspect, his infidelity seen as a possible motive for Daisy's disappearance. As he was brought in for questioning, the carefully constructed life of the Blackwood family began to crumble once and for all. Little did the investigators know that the true culprit was hiding in plain sight, her guilt eating away at her with each passing day. The tragedy that had befallen Daisy Summers was far from over, its repercussions continuing to ripple through the lives of all involved. The trial that followed was a media sensation, laying bare the dark undercurrents that had run beneath the surface of the Blackwoods' seemingly perfect life. Imogen was sentenced to life in prison, her fall from grace complete. Everett, while cleared of direct involvement in Daisy's death, saw his reputation and career destroyed by the scandal. A student went out for a bike ride, but never made it back home. From the very first days, her disappearance sparked one of the largest searches the city had ever seen. And soon, the whole country was talking about this case. Detectives chased down thousands of tips and looked into hundreds of suspects, but every lead turned into a dead end. That's how it went, until an unexpected twist finally revealed the chilling truth. Ardith Wood was born on October 28, 1975, in St. John, Canada. Not long after, she became a big sister to two younger brothers, and the family eventually moved to Ottawa. That's where Ardith went through Catholic school and later enrolled in university, diving into history and philosophy. After earning her degrees, she decided to keep going and enrolled at another university near Toronto to pursue a PhD in philosophy. Ardith was genuinely passionate about it and pictured herself teaching at a top university one day. Her professors often remarked on her exceptional talent. In fact, at times they felt like they were talking to a colleague rather than a student. Outside the classroom, she was active and athletic. She loved swimming, running, and cycling. She also dreamed of having a big family, and she was in a serious relationship, planning to marry her boyfriend after finishing her PhD. In the summer of 2003, when she was 27, Ardith decided to visit her family in Ottawa and spend 2 weeks with them. Her university was about 300 miles away from home, so she didn't get to see her loved ones very often. Since they were such a close-knit family, being apart for that long was tough on her, and she planned to spend as much time with them as possible during her break. On the morning of August 6th, Ardith got up early and went for a run. When she came back, she made a strawberry dessert for her parents and brothers. Later that day, she and her mom were planning to go shopping, but the forecast warned that heavy rain was on the way. So, Ardith decided to head out for a bike ride while the weather was still holding up. She promised her mom she'd be back in about an hour and a half, borrowed her brother's bike, and rode off. An hour and a half later, the rain the forecast had promised finally came pouring down, but Ardith still hadn't returned. Her mom figured she'd gotten caught in the storm and was probably waiting it out under some kind of shelter. But as time passed, the rain stopped, and Ardith was still nowhere to be seen. Worried, her mom called her husband, who quickly went out with their sons to search for her. They drove along the city's long park trail, a popular spot for cyclists. As kids, Ardith and her brothers had spent countless hours biking there, so her family assumed that's where she might have gone. But it was only a guess. Before leaving, Ardith hadn't told anyone exactly where she planned to ride, and her father and brothers couldn't find any trace of her. By then, it was already starting to get dark, and her family was in a panic. More than 6 hours had passed since she'd left the house, and they were almost certain something bad had happened. They decided it was time to call the police. But the local police department didn't launch a full search right away, since Ardith was 27 years old. Her family, though, refused to just sit around and wait. They started calling friends and neighbors, asking them to help. Dozens of people joined the search, coming through bike trails all over the city late into the night. Still, there was no sign of Ardith. The biggest problem was that Ottawa's bike paths stretched more than 100 miles, and no one knew which route she had taken. All they could do was guess that she'd chosen the closest one to home. The next morning, police finally joined the search and set up a command post at the Aviation Museum, a spot where several major bike trails intersected. They brought in dozens of officers and also reached out to the public for help. Photos of Ardith were handed out to newspapers and TV stations, and volunteers were urged to join the search. The community's response was overwhelming. Within just hours, hundreds of locals joined the search. Mounted police showed up, along with helicopters and even the military. Very quickly, the search for Ardith became one of the biggest in Ottawa's history. But, despite the massive effort, there was still no trace of her. News of Ardith's disappearance spread quickly across the city, and soon police were flooded with hundreds of calls and tips. In the very first days, several women came forward with eerily similar stories. Each of them said they'd been approached by a man, and from their descriptions, it sounded like the same guy every time. They explained that he would approach them on bike paths or park trails that ran along the river, not far from the very spot where police had set up their command post. One woman told officers that he rode up to her on a bike, and at first he seemed very nice. He was fit, good-looking, and started off with casual small talk, but then out of nowhere he tried to pull her off her bike and drag her into the trees. Terrified, she managed to break free and spent away. Based on her account, police were able to create a composite sketch of the suspect. But they decided not to release it to the public. They were already overwhelmed with tips, and without solid evidence to connect him to Ardith's disappearance. Putting out the sketch would only create even more noise. Even if someone recognized him and gave them a name, they'd have no way to prove the link. So they held off. But in the following days, more women came forward with nearly identical stories. A man matching the same description approached them in local parks, acted strangely, and in some cases even tried to drag them off the trail into the woods. Another lead came from a 16-year-old girl who had been riding her bike in the park. She told police that she'd seen Ardith's photo on the news and immediately recognized her, because she'd actually spotted her in the park on the day she vanished. According to the teen, she rode past Ardith, but just a few seconds later heard a woman scream. When she turned around, she saw Ardith standing with a man, and it looked like they were arguing. She kept going, but when she looked back again, she saw the man walking into the woods with Ardith beside him. Something about it didn't feel right, so she circled back. By the time she returned, though, they were gone. Curious but uneasy, she went a little further into the trees. First, she noticed a hat hanging on a branch. Then, just a few steps later, she came across 2 bikes lying on the ground. But there was no sign of Ardith or the man, and at that point, she decided not to go any deeper. She convinced herself she might just be overthinking things, that maybe she'd only witnessed a couple having an argument. As she rode away, though, she thought she heard another scream. She couldn't be sure if it was real or if her mind was playing tricks on her. When police later showed her the composite sketch created from the other women's descriptions, she confirmed that it looked a lot like the man she saw with Ardith that day. This pushed detectives towards the theory that Ardith had been abducted, and now they had a better idea of where it might have happened. They swept through the park with hundreds of volunteers, and even brought in divers to search the long, narrow river running through the area. For days after Ardith went missing, the effort finally paid off. Divers pulled a bike from the bottom of the river, and the serial number confirmed it belonged to Ardith's brother. At that point, detectives realized the chances of finding her alive were slim, and they shifted all their focus to the riverbanks. That same day, police got a call unlike any of the tips they'd received before. On the other end of the line was a man who sounded panicked. He said he had accidentally killed Ardith near a bike path. According to him, it wasn't planned, it was some kind of accident. He went on to say that afterward, he partially buried her body near the riverbank and covered it with branches. Investigators traced the call and learned it had come from a payphone in a nearby town. They rushed to the scene, hoping the caller might have left behind fingerprints or DNA on the phone. But once again, they came up empty. Meanwhile, police brought in search dogs to comb both sides of the river where Ardith's bike had turned up. And the very next day, the dogs led them to a body lying just a few feet from the water, partially hidden under branches. The decomposition was so advanced that investigators couldn't identify it by sight, and there were no clothes on it. But they knew almost instantly it had to be Ardith. They turned the remains over to medical examiners and combed the crime scene. But there was nothing, no footprints, no belongings, nothing that could point them toward a suspect. Later, medical experts confirmed the victim was Ardith. They determined she had drowned, most likely held underwater until she died. Afterward, her killer dragged her onto the riverbank and tried to cover her with branches. Since police couldn't find any of her clothing, it was clear the killer had taken it with him. Examiners couldn't say for sure if Ardith had been sexually assaulted, but everything about the scene pointed strongly in that direction. After Ardith's body was found, investigators decided to release the composite sketch of the suspect, and it triggered a flood of new tips. Many women said a man matching that description had harassed them in local parks, but none of it brought police closer to putting a name to the face. Over time, detectives built a list of several hundred possible suspects, checking each one carefully, but still couldn't tie anyone directly to Ardith's murder. They also looked into the possibility that a serial offender was responsible. Same man who had assaulted several women in the nearby town where the confession call to police had come from. That predator had attacked multiple women just a year earlier and was never caught. Detectives tried hard to link the two cases, but once again they hit a dead end. Even so, tips kept flooding in, and investigators were struck by how many women had run into a man who looked like the composite sketch. But when they pieced it all together, they realized he'd been spotted in that very park at least 19 times in the week before Ardith disappeared. Even more chilling, one woman saw him the day after the murder, before Ardith's body had been discovered. Detectives believed he might have returned to the scene to hide the body better, or to collect evidence before police could find it. There was one more detail witnesses kept bringing up. Many of them said the man had an eagle tattoo on his shoulder. At first, detectives kept that information to themselves because it was their strongest lead. But as the weeks dragged on and they were no closer to making an arrest, they decided to release it to the public. As a result, hundreds of calls came in about men with similar tattoos. Detectives followed up on every single one. But once again, it led nowhere. In the months that followed, detectives kept working through the flood of tips. More than 4,000 in total. They tried to chase down every lead, which was an overwhelming task. Eventually, though, two specific calls caught their attention. One came in shortly after Ardith's body was found, and the other arrived months later. But both callers pointed to the same man, a local who lived in the same town where the confession call had been made from that payphone. In fact, he lived in the very neighborhood where that payphone stood. On top of that, he had a criminal record, and he had a bird tattoo on his shoulder that matched what witnesses described. Detectives brought him in for questioning, and his behavior was strange. At one point, he even told them they'd never figure out what he was doing on the day Ardith was killed, because he was as elusive as a scorpion. Investigators grilled him for 3 hours, but he gave them nothing useful. So they called him back for a second interview, this time with a polygraph. By then, detectives were nearly convinced this was their guy, but the results completely blindsided them. The polygraph examiner didn't flag a single lie. With no hard evidence to hold the suspect on, detectives had no choice but to let him go. And the clean polygraph results left them questioning whether he was really their suspect after all. Over time, the flood of tips finally dried up. But detectives kept going through the old ones one by one. A year after the murder, their lead investigator told reporters that they were still working through their suspect list, which had around 400 men on it. Most had already been ruled out, but a chunk of them were still question marks. Police also put up a $50,000 reward, the biggest ever put up in Ottawa at the time. But not even that was enough to bring them any closer to finding the killer. By the 2-year mark, detectives had run out of leads, and the case basically went cold. That's how it stayed until September 2005, when another young woman vanished in Ottawa. 18-year-old Jennifer Teague, whose story we've already covered on this channel. Investigators immediately looked for a possible link, since the two cases seemed so similar. But in the end, no connection was ever found. After that, the case sat cold for almost another year, and detectives were beginning to doubt they'd ever solve it. They had no physical evidence, and despite all the eyewitness accounts, they still couldn't put a name to the mysterious man seen in the park. But then, on May 2006, everything suddenly changed. Police in North Bay, a city about 190 miles from Ottawa, got a call from an attempted assault. A woman reported that she was walking home late at night when a man approached her and asked if he could walk with her. She said no and kept going, but he followed, claiming he needed help. He told her he had just moved from Ottawa and couldn't find the address he was looking for. As she started giving him directions, the man suddenly grabbed her and dragged her into the bushes. He tried to assault her, but the woman screamed and nearby residents heard it. One man even ran outside with a shovel and scared the attacker off. The suspect bolted, dropping his phone as he ran. That mistake cost him dearly. Police quickly tracked him down and arrested him. The man was 25-year-old Christopher Myers, who had only recently moved to North Bay from Ottawa. While preparing the case against him, the lead detective suddenly remembered hearing about the Ardith Wood case at a police conference. He dug out the handouts from that event, and among them was a composite sketch of the suspect. The resemblance to Christopher was uncanny. He immediately passed the tip on to investigators in Ottawa, who started taking a closer look at Myers. The first thing they realized was that police had actually spoken to Christopher in the early weeks after Arda's disappearance. An anonymous tipster had called the hotline and named him as a suspect. Detectives had checked him out, but found nothing solid linking him to the crime. He even seemed to have an alibi. The woman who rented him a room said she'd seen him earlier in the day, and by 3 p.m., he had already left for his work shift. Since Ardith was believed to have been attacked around 1.30, it seemed likely he simply wouldn't have had the time to be in the park. About a year later, Christopher's name popped up again when another tip came in. This time, police decided to take a closer look at him and brought him in for questioning. He denied having anything to do with Ardith's murder, and even showed them his shoulders to prove he had no tattoos, something that made detectives doubt whether he really was their guy. But now, with Christopher back on their radar for the third time, and given the fact that he had just tried to drag another woman into the bushes, detectives started seeing him as their prime suspect. The problem was they still needed hard evidence to prove it. The first thing they did was revisit his alibi. Originally, his landlady had told police she saw him at home during the day, which seemed to clear him. But when investigators went back and spoke with her again, she clarified that she had actually seen him in the morning. That small detail changed everything. It meant that he had plenty of time to ride his bike from his house to the park, attack Ardith, and still make it to his afternoon shift. To be sure, police even retraced the entire route by bike themselves and confirmed it was absolutely possible. Eventually, detectives went to the neighboring city to question Christopher. At first, he flat out denied having anything to do with it. But when they told him that multiple women had spotted him in the park, his story started to change. He admitted he'd been riding his bike there that day, and even claimed he ran into Ardith and struck up a conversation with her. According to Christopher, after a brief chat, Ardith supposedly agreed to walk with him into the woods by the river. But then, he claimed, another girl appeared, spooking Ardith and causing her to fall into the water. He said he left right away, but later came back only to find her already drowned. That's when he claimed he pulled her body onto the shore, covered it with branches, and simply walked away without telling anyone what had happened. Detectives knew the story was complete nonsense, but at the same time, Christopher had just admitted to having contact with Ardith on the day of the murder. What's more, the other girl in his tale sounded a lot like the 16-year-old witness who reported hearing a scream and spotting Ardith with a man before they vanished into the woods. It seemed like Christopher had taken her account from the news and twisted it into his own version. Not long after, he backtracked again, saying the whole story was a lie. He claimed he had never been in the park at all, that he had only heard about Ardith's case from the news, and made everything up based on publicly available details. Detectives then put him on a polygraph, and he failed. Even so, Christopher kept insisting he was innocent, and without solid physical evidence, police couldn't charge him with murder. While Christopher was still behind bars in the neighboring city, detectives started digging into his past, hoping to uncover anything that could tie him to Ardith's murder. They learned that his mother had been drinking and using drugs while pregnant, which left Christopher with mental health issues from an early age. To make matters worse, she physically abused him until, at age 4, he was adopted by another family. But 8 years later, even they gave up on him. His behavior had become deeply disturbing and impossible to manage. He talked to himself constantly, stripped naked in public, and grew more aggressive with each passing year. One psychologist who treated him even said Christopher was the most frightening child he had ever worked with. On the surface, his adult life looked more stable. He managed to hold a job, find housing, and mostly stayed off the police radar, aside from a few Dick-related arrests. He even had girlfriends, and detectives tracked some of them down to ask about his past. One ex described how Christopher would frequently fly into rages and sometimes hit her. She also confirmed that he was always riding his bike around parks. But then she told detectives something that stunned them. Christopher had a habit of giving himself temporary tattoos, and more than once, she'd seen an eagle tattoo inked onto his shoulder. This information became the missing piece of the puzzle, the final detail that convinced detectives Christopher really was their guy. Up until then, the tattoo could have blown the whole case apart. If he really hadn't had it, every eyewitness account would have fallen flat. But with a witness now confirming he did have that eagle tattoo on his shoulder, detectives knew they weren't chasing shadows anymore. Still, it wasn't nearly enough to bring the case to trial. What they needed was a confession. 5 months after his arrest for the attempted assault, detectives brought him back in for questioning, this time with backup. They invited in an experienced investigator from the UK, someone with a reputation for getting people to talk. At first, Christopher flat out denied having anything to do with Ardith's murder, but later he slipped back into the same story he told before. The one about meeting her by the river, kissing her, and then claiming she drowned after another girl startled her. Then, just as quickly, he took it all back. But not long after, he drew detectives a map showing where he said he first met Ardith and the spot where they supposedly went together. He even agreed to take them out there and point everything out in person. But once they actually arrived, Christopher suddenly changed his tune again, saying he didn't recognize the park at all. So, while his story wasn't a full confession, it was just enough to keep him on the hook. But detectives had something else up their sleeve. They believed Christopher might not only be tied to Ardith's murder, but also to a string of unsolved sexual assaults that had happened around Ottawa at the very same time. The pattern was always the same. A man would approach women on the street, strike up a conversation, then suddenly attack and sexually assault them. When police spoke to the victims and showed them Christopher's photo, several of them confirmed without hesitation. He was the one who attacked them. Armed with this, detectives hauled him in for another round of questioning. This time, after hours of pressure, Christopher finally broke and admitted to 5 separate assaults. That confession gave police what they needed, additional charges, and, combined with everything else, a much stronger case against him for Ardith's murder. In the end, Christopher was finally charged with murder, and the case went to trial. Took years to get there, but in January 2008, prosecutors put a deal on the table. If he pled guilty, they dropped the charge from first-degree to second-degree murder. In the end, Christopher took the deal. He admitted that he approached Ardith on the bike path, dragged her into the woods with the intent to assault her, and then drowned her in the river. He also pled guilty to several other attacks on women. For all of this, he got a life sentence, but with the possibility of parole after just 10 years. That leniency was part of the plea deal, though it didn't mean he'd actually walk free. His first chance at parole came in 2015, but the board flat out denied it. 5 years later, in 2020, he tried again and was turned down once more. This time, experts made it clear, even after 15 years behind bars, he was still considered highly likely to reoffend. As of today, Christopher is still in prison, and it's unlikely he'll ever walk free. Ardith Wood's murder became one of the most infamous cases in Ottawa's history, leaving deep scars on the community. For years afterward, women were terrified to walk in parks or ride their bikes alone. Locals even organized volunteer patrols along the bike paths. Groups of people riding together to watch over each other and prevent anything like this from happening again. And one last note, while Christopher admitted to several assaults, detectives were convinced he had committed many more. The issue was that not all of his victims ever saw his face, which made it impossible to tie him directly to every case. As for the Jennifer Teague case mentioned earlier in this story, you'll find the link to that video in the description. Share your thoughts on this story in the comments section, and don't forget to press the like button.